Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kirtchik, for joining to this seminar. Let's start.
Thank you, Ivan, for presentation here. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen, right? So I'm really happy to present this piece of research that I'm currently doing. So it's going to be a part of my book on the history of the Soviet reform economics. And actually, I am not an economist, not a historian of economics, but I'm a sociologist, and I'm doing historical sociology of economic knowledge, economic sciences in the Soviet Union. And so my presentation that I prepared for you today, so we'll have three points, three parts that you see right now. So I'll try to start with a brief discussion of what it is to be an economist in the Soviet Union, right? What type of economic knowledge existed in the Soviet Union in this very particular political and socioeconomic regime. And then in the second part, I will speak about the institutional intellectual expansion of economic sciences after the Second World War, especially the attempts of economists to propose different solutions to rationalize or improve the management of the Soviet economy. And finally, my last part will be about the economists and perestroika, or this is the last movement for reform in the USSR, which ended with the destruction of the state and the transition to democracy and capitalism, at least in principle. So let me start with this puzzle, right? Economists in the Soviet state. One might anticipate even a great role for economists in the context of building communism in the Soviet Union, right? As with what you've seen already on Tuesday with Andrei on the ideas of scientific communism that had to be in the foundation of the new economic system. And at the same time, this was this new economy, a radically different form of economic knowledge had to emerge to accompany this new unprecedented socioeconomic experiment. And however, upon a close examination, and it was already stated by the historians of the Soviet Union and economics in the Soviet Union, so it becomes apparent that the Soviet economists occupied quite an ambiguous position. So, because they were expected, at least in theory, to assist the Soviet government in combating the chaos of the market through the rationalization of management and scientifically based planning. And simultaneously, they were compelled to adhere to the ideological line of the party, which was defined by the political leadership. And thus, this fundamental dilemma between economic rationality and ideology helps to elucidate the Soviet regime's inability to ultimately capitalize on the promises of rational planning and organization of production, which were closely associated with the Soviet concept of scientific management. And the Soviet Union wanted to be this a state based on scientific premises. And in order to understand this specific situation, the specific position of Soviet economists, I rely on some theoretical concepts and approaches from sociology, which can be mobilized for such an analysis, historical development of various professions or scientific fields or fields of expertise, like the economic one. So a specific form of economies and technocracy, which was proper to the early Soviet state, assigned the special role and status to economic knowledge. And as a consequence, economics was, especially in contrast to other social sciences, like sociology, political science, anthropology, had a strong presence within the academic and bureaucratic system. And so this strong demand for the state, for economic knowledge and for the economic expertise represented a resource for professionalization and institutional development of economic sciences. But at the same time, this embeddedness of the economic knowledge in administrative and state structures produced various forms of structural dependency of economies on the ideological apparatus and economic bureaucracy. And especially with the establishment of and consolidation of Stalin's power in the early 30s, so political economy was really embedded in the emerged power structure. So in the Soviet case, we have a specific model of relations between economics and government, which is very different from what we can observe. For instance, in the American case, where the analytical scheme of professionalization was applied, and which associates the process of professionalization and autonomization of professional academic field. So in sociology of professions, like for example, in the book by sociologist Andrew Abbott, which is called The System of Professions, published in 1988, professions are defined by the monopoly of state-recognized areas of expertise, which he calls the jurisdictions, which lead to the division of expert labor. So, for instance, like jurists or economists or engineers will have their monopoly, which is socially recognized and legitimized to provide some expertise or jurisdiction over their field of expertise. So there's these processes of professionalization and autonomization are closely associated in this case. And another approach to analyze socio-historical genesis of fields of expertise was proposed by the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, who analyzed the logic of social differentiation, which leads to the formation of autonomous spheres, autonomous fields of praxis and expertise. But for Bourdieu, these fields, for instance, economic field or political field or judicial field and so on, have only relative autonomy, in the sense that they're always entanglements with other forms of power, like political power, economic power, and so on. So this two approaches were used, for example, by the sociologist Marion Fourcade, who published very well known by now in this scholarly literature book called Economies and Societies, where she analyzed the formation of the field of economics in three different countries, like the United States, Great Britain, and France, and to show that in each configuration of a specific national, institutional, political, and cultural characteristics produced different profiles and different types of models of relations of between economies and political space. So we see with these analytical tools, we can see that the degree of the autonomy of academic fields varies by political regimes. And it was shown that the authoritarian states tend to limit the autonomy of academic and other cultural fields or academic fields to much greater extent. And in the Soviet Union and other socialist countries, like quote, intellectual and artistic producers professionalized by the state could centralize and nationalize their production, so they could better control it and use it for propaganda, but also for practical purposes. And so economic sciences in the Soviet Union grew to be the most important in size and influence among social sciences, and provided numerous job opportunities in the administration and other sectors, but their autonomy was severely compromised. So paradoxically, in this case, precisely professionalization even favored the dependency, structural dependency, heteronomy of the academic field, and not the autonomy. And the Soviet case was probably extreme in this respect, where the economic research was subordinated to the party's ideological line and the needs of economic administration through the Soviet history, and especially with the consolidation of Stalin's rule. And already in 1929, Stalin explicitly assigned a new role to economics and to serve the Soviet state, and defined a new criterion of scientific truth, right, as conformity with Marxist-Leninist ideology. However, in the post-war period, economists like other social scientists in the Soviet Union, but also in other socialist countries, were able to negotiate a limited spaces of autonomy and intellectual innovation. And as we shall see in what follows, this change in place of economic rationality and economists under the Soviet socialism is indeed central to understand the move from the Stalinist economy and polity to perestroika and post-Soviet reforms. So the advocacy of economic reforms by Soviet and Eastern European economists also became a way of promoting a specific economic rationality, as opposed to the political and bureaucratic logic of centralized management. And so basically, under the Soviet rule, economists had three different roles, and the economic sciences were subdivided into three major types. So first of all, political economy of socialism, which performed an important ideological function and was really the primary form of economic knowledge. And so it was responsible, it was tasked with doctrinary questions, like about defining what socialism is, what are the laws of the political economy of socialism, and so on. And indeed, its role was important in the sense that, especially from the 60s, the political courses of political economy of socialism were compulsory for any students in the Soviet Union. So this ideological work was extremely important to educate the population to the Soviet ideology, and also to distinguish between what is true and false, what is some economic theories, works, whether they conform or not to Marxist-Leninist ideology. And then there were so-called functional economic sciences, which are necessary, or domains of economics, which are necessary for managing the economy as a whole, in which we can also find in the central managing bodies like the Planning Commission, statistics, or price setting committee, and so on. And then, of course, branch-specific economic sciences or linked to particular sectors of the national economy, like agriculture, transport, different branches of industry, and so on. And so, accordingly, research institutions were subordinated directly either to the highest administrative authority, like on the government, the Council of Ministers, or central bodies of economic administration, or sectoral ministries of branches like agriculture and so on. And so this political administrative division of labor produced this structural heteronomy, or the specific model of professionalization without autonomy, characteristic of Soviet economic sciences. And so all the education and careers of economists were also organized according to this division on these three types of economic knowledge. But at the same time, which is really can be seen as quite paradoxical, from Stalin's time on, and still in 50s, 60s, 70s, for economists, although they had a strong presence in the Soviet educational system and the state administration, the economists didn't have a high social prestige. And for example, they could rarely rise to a high management position, like in the industry as well as in economic administration. And government structures were dominated by engineers, not economists. And these engineers often followed a full career path from simple employee, simple engineer, to the director of industrial enterprise, and then in the ministry, all this way to sometimes be minister, and were typically well versed in how the economy actually functioned. And so there was the tension between these two types of expertise, two types of careers, in engineers and economists. And in the post-war period, however, economics pretends to have a greater role in socialist governance. And indeed, there are a few different trends which emerge and which tend to have a science as a to integrate science to production, to the socialist production, to social governance. And economics becomes once again truly a policy science in the post-war period. And one of these important trends was the ideology, new developments in the party ideology, which promotes the so-called scientific and technological revolution. So like in the West, this framework was used by party ideologues to revive the ambitions of the Soviet state as a scientific state. And this implied to give a greater role to science in policy making. So science had to become, in Marxist terms, a direct productive force. And also, in the same time, since the second half of the 50s, the party set itself increasingly ambitious goals in the economy, in the economic sphere, and culminating in promises to build communism within 20 years. And so along the arms space or conquest of space, the competition between West and East had to be played out also in the economic domain. And so these innovations helped to shape a new reformist and technocratic orientation or new definition of economists' mission. And so this helped, first of all, an institutional expansion of economic sciences. So in the second half of 50s, during the 60s, especially a network of research institutions in economics was established within the Soviet Academy of Sciences, and those economic research institutions were established in the economic administrations. Like, for instance, the Economics Institute of the Gosplan or Planning Committee. Then, as another important trend that you've already seen with Andrei on Tuesday is, of course, mathematization and formalization of economic sciences, the introduction of mathematical methods into economic analysis, and the establishment of a new discipline, which was called economic cybernetics. And also it allowed an international opening, exchanges, cooperation between Soviet social scientists and Western economists, and also circulations within the socialist bloc. And I will just repeat go very fast through this point, because it was already discussed in Tuesday's lecture. So these new academic institutions, which were created after the Second World War, which became the hotbeds of the Soviet reform economics, were involved in imagining and promoting changes in the Soviet administrative system and negotiating the new spaces for science in defining the socioeconomic and industrial policies. And so new mathematical tools and techniques, such as input-output tables, methods of mathematical optimization, forecasting of regional national development, and so on, were developed by Soviet economists in order to rationalize or improve Soviet economic management and planning. And this focus on planning is easily understandable, because, of course, it was a central instrument of economic governance in the Soviet Union. And also, it was a highly complex task. So, thus, in 1966, there were about 40,000 enterprises in the Soviet Union. And of course, it was a huge task to plan the activities of these tens of thousands enterprises. There were multiple inconsistencies and huge disbalances and other problems of which both economists and state officials were quite aware at the time. And so in the 60s, the expectations on the new information technology were particularly high. So computers and new information technologies were to allow to rationalize the Soviet planning to make it at least more consistent and more efficient. And probably the most ambitious programs of this type are, of course, the System for Optimal Functioning of the Economy, or SOFE, developed in the 60s and 70s by the Central Mathematical Economic Institute in Moscow, which was partly based on a theory of optimal planning by Leonid Kontorovich, who was primarily a mathematician, who invented linear programming and worked on optimal allocation of resources for the Soviet economic system. And so this idea of optimizing economic decision-making was also at the heart of the nationwide system of automated management of the country's economy, known as OGAZ, to where basically a computer network linking computing centers implemented throughout the country in order to collect and process information for the purposes of administration and planning. And interestingly, this period of you can describe as highly technocratic period with, or techno-solutionist period is economic expertise, economic knowledge, and it was constantly challenged by other types of expertise and knowledge, like by engineers, scientists, physicists, mathematicians, and even specialists in artificial intelligence. They show in one of my articles, who proposed their theoretical models and projects aimed to redesign the Soviet system of economic management with help of computer and information technologies and different types of economic modeling, mathematical modeling. And so this time emerged a specific identity of economist as an engineer or an engineer as economist, and which was really important for a significant part of this academic field. Without going into real detail of these methods that you've already partly discussed, so this SOFE, OGAS, and similar projects were at the time sharply criticized by orthodox political economists as not compatible with Marxism-Leninism. on the one hand, and these methods were also criticized as being impractical or even utopian by more practically oriented economists and administrators. But nonetheless, this umbrella research program like SOFIA was important as it became a common ground for testing different ideas and discussing various reform proposals and voicing critiques of the Soviet economy and its inefficiencies, which will be reformulated and even used in policies later during the 80s. During the 70s, we are still in this largely techno-solutionist paradigm, but the ambitions of economists, mathematicians, and engineers are not so say radical or don't imply a radical overhaul of the Soviet management. However, this thinking about the ways to improve the planning system continue almost until the mid-80s or even later, until perestroika. Was all these threads of thinking continue to be developed. So I could talk, for example, about the program management methods, which are aimed to address another major problem of the Soviet planning, which is organized by sectors or branches, branch specific, and thus it is some program management methods were proposed to enhance the coordination of large projects which had to be carried out by different sectoral ministries. So there were a series of such programs of implemented, like food program, which indeed demanded the coordination of the efforts of various ministries, agriculture and machine building and so on and so forth. Or, for instance, the programs of regional development, which is a program for the development of Siberia in the 70s and so on. And another significant development was indeed this movement for social and economic forecasting, which aimed to address another major limitation of the Soviet planning, which is a narrow time horizon. So there economists, mathematicians at this point were arguing that this new stage of the economic development and fostering the scientific technological progress demanded much larger time horizon, that some specific programs for 15 years at least were needed to forecast and to program the development of technological sectors, computer industry, and so on. And in the 70s, there were a huge academic and administrative endeavor, called the Comprehensive Program of the Scientific and Technological Progress, of which 3 editions were prepared. So, for instance, for the period of 1976 to 1990, and then 1986 2005, and the last one for the years 91 and 2010. And we can say that this production was like a sort of main expert product or vitrine of Soviet economic sciences of the time. And how then we can ask ourselves how all these developments, all this mathematics, and change the real practices of planning, or of the State Planning Committee. And before answering this question, we need to understand how Soviet planning was organized. And on this slide, you see very briefly the main stages of the preparation of 2 types of plans. First of all, the 5-year plan, which was a plan of general, which set the goals of the development for various economic sectors, and set the goals to be achieved in during 5 years. And so the first stage consisted in the preparation of what was called the main directions of socioeconomic development, and typically it was produced by Politburo within the highest echelons of the political power. And then this based on these main directions, which set really very broad goals, like we should develop chemical industry, or send more satellites, or develop agriculture priority, and so on. So based on these main directions, 5-year plan project at this stage was prepared by Gosplan. And after this first draft was discussed in the Congress of the Communist Party. And after this, after this 5-year plan was adopted, the work on the other type of planning device began, which was the annual plan, and which of course was even more important than the 5-year plan, because it was a detailed instruction to for ministries and enterprises, which set concrete targets of production for different industries and enterprises. And so, first of all, there were meetings were carried out in the Soviet government, Council of Ministers, with the presence of about 50 ministers. And after this, other economic administrations entered the scene, like planning committee, but also statistical committee, committee on prices, finance, and of course the Committee for Distribution or Allocation of Resources. And so it was decided which raw materials or other resources were allocated to different ministries. And finally, this work was detailed in the Gosplan during almost the whole year. The plan, an annual plan for the next year, was produced and distributed to the executors. So it was an extremely complex and multi-stage process where very many stakeholders participated. And the question of mathematics and Gosplan is really a complex one, because there were many observers at the time, and now historical literature argue that finally mathematics, the expectations were very high, but mathematics finally didn't help very much, and indeed wasn't used and didn't really change the Gosplan practices of planning. And it's true to some extent, but we'll try to see that at the same time, some mathematical tools will become instruments of government with time. The mathematics was to enter the Gosplan practice since the early time, since the late 50s, and the departments were created, and the computer center, main computer center of Gosplan also was established in the early 60s. And among various promising tools and projects which were intended to transform, to enhance the practices of planning, in the end of the day, Gosplan economists were particularly interested in input-output models, or what was called in the Soviet vocabulary inter-industry balance models. And so the first inter-industry balance sheets were produced in the Soviet Union in the 20s, in 1924, but then were forgotten in planning practice for a few decades. And in the 60s, input-output analysis traveled back to the USSR to become the main field of mathematical economic research. And in 1968, this field was recognized by a prestigious Soviet State Prize in Science and Technology for the contribution to the development of methods of analysis and planning of intersectoral relations and sectoral structure of the national economy. And it was an important milestone in legitimation of the use of these tools. And since this time, so various techniques of mathematical statistics were gradually introduced into planning practice. The work on input-output inter-industry models was conducted in the Gosplan main computing center in close contact with its Economic Research Institute. And in particular, they attempted developing a dynamic model for calculation of 5-year plans for first for 18 essential industries. And in the 70s, this work was led with the help of the automated system for planning calculations, which allowed to formalize and automate some stages of the planning process. And so they were trying to do also some forecasts. For instance, model the trajectory of the national economy for 15 years or 3-5-year plans period. And this time the calculations were made for 250 products. And so the interest of this inter-industry models was to show the movement of material flows, raw materials and other products between industries. So an output or product of one industry became an input of in another sector, which really corresponded to the existing practice of planning, which took into account essentially the volumes, physical volumes of products. And so by 1980s, the computer center was able to produce even bigger balance models for larger numbers of products. And most importantly, they were able to consider not only physical volumes, but also cost indicators or financial indicators. And according to these economists, it was a significant breakthrough, as this model clearly demonstrated the huge cost imbalances between different categories of products that had developed in the country's economy since the 30s. And in an interview with Jakob Urenson, was main economist in the Gosplan Computing Center, who responsible for work on these models. So he told in his interview that it was clear that these imbalances were not random phenomena, but there is something characteristic of this economy which generates these disproportions, starting practically from 1999, and they appeared and never disappeared afterwards. So these phenomena, which were practically observed, now could be formalized. So what was the impact of this input-output techniques on Gosplan's practice? So according to Gosplan economists, these balances allowed to agree numbers and showed the interconnectedness of industries. So they allowed to show that we use more steel rolling, then we have less construction and this and so this models provided important information on the current state and on the interrelated development of industries, and allowed to correct some problem areas. And in interviews, at least, that they're telling that some, not all, but at least some high officials of Gosplan were really interested in the results of this work. So in addition to these inter-industry models and planning calculations, Gosplan was using some mathematical programming techniques to solve specific problems, such as optimal location of for construction of new plants. And however, the use of these mathematical models didn't really change the practice of planning or procedure of planning in its essence. So they could be really helpful, but they played more a technical role. And here, once again, we see this problem of the supremacy of the ideological or political over the economic. And once again, I quote from an interview, how can you change the practice of centralized planning? By changing the management system. It's not the task of our balance sheet. It's about social relations, not mathematics. So here on this slide, summarize this social relations aspect of planning, which can be seen more than art than a science. First of all, it was a party which set the priorities and goals of socioeconomic development with this general with this main directions of 5-year plans. But also we can see this in that the plan targets and resources allocated to achieve these targets were an object of constant bargaining or negotiation between ministries, enterprises, and council of ministers and organs of central administration. And the 1-year plans as well were object of continuous corrections, and especially towards the end of the year, representatives of plans, enterprises, or ministries sent telegrams, letters, or to Gosplan asking to correct their plan targets, most often to decrease, not to decrease, not to increase, of course. So this aspect is really social relations was much more important than really, and indeed technical instruments could serve as an justification in asking for more resources or to decrease plans and so on. And after all, the Soviet planning was not scientifically based, but politically motivated and shaped by all these pragmatic considerations. And especially the main economists of Gosplan once again characterized this, that Soviet planning was the greatest art of maneuvering among all to reach some consensus. So mini conclusion from this part, that we can say that despite the official recognition of reform economics and continuous efforts to rationalize or improve planning practices and other management practices, economists still were not granted by the state this monopoly or jurisdiction defining what is the Soviet planning, what is the Soviet economic system should look like. And now I'm moving to my last part, moving to the 80s and the economists and perestroika. First of all, why? I think that many of us asking ourselves why party like Gorbachev and other Soviet leaders decided to launch this radical overhaul of the Soviet political and economic system. But first of all, it started with a constatation of real deterioration of the Soviet economy during the 70s, and which continued also into the 80s. And since the 70s, we see really growing awareness among economists and state officials as well. For instance, in officials of Gosplan or government officials, of this deterioration. Virtually all macroeconomic indicators, like declining growth rates, diminishing returns on capital investment, declining labor productivity, and in the meetings, in the archival material, we can clearly see the meetings of the Council of Ministers, Gosplan board, and also on the pages of popular newspapers. They were regularly discussed such long-standing problems of the Soviet economy as unfinished construction projects and other types of inefficient use of resources, growing disbalances, and which were expressed in increase in shortages of different goods of consumption, and also in the various opportunistic practices of industrial enterprises, like we've seen, they tried to decrease their planning targets and to increase resources, and often accumulated rare materials in their warehouses just in case there won't be allocated enough rare materials in the next planned period. And especially lack of motivation to take higher plans and introduce technical innovations. Also poor discipline in the fulfillment of plans and deliveries, and so on. So these problems could be really enumerated further. And the main question then was how to make enterprises behave economically, and how to improve what they called at the time the economic mechanism. And interestingly, in the beginning of the 80s, we see this fields of optimization, mathematizations were almost not forgotten, but I think there were some deception at this time with the potential use of these methods. And there's a new reflection is developed since the 70s on what they call the science of governance, which is inspired by cybernetics, systems theory, and some Western management theories. And these critiques of economists and their policy recommendations were now directed not only against the directive planning, but it is the whole system of centralized management which is under the scrutiny. And it is no coincidence that many of the leading economists of Gorbachev's perestroika, his personal aides and important personalities, were specialists in this science of governance, which participated in the production and dissemination of specific conceptual frameworks for interpreting the problems of perfecting economic management. Interestingly, they were thinking really about the problems of Soviet economy in terms of governance. So in order to solve all these problems, one had to act on the managerial or organizational technical problems. And so various arguments and lines of critique were developed in institutions of reformist economics. And really we have, what I think is also interesting, that it's not only mathematical economics which is behind this movement, but it's we can talk about very different threads which converge to some common conclusions, a sort of reformist common sense which crystallizes by the beginning of perestroika. And so these critical assessments of the existing management system came from mathematical economists, but also industrial management specialists and also political economists, all of whom called for promoting innovation by investing in technical progress, restructuring the economic bureaucracy, by reducing the number and authority of ministries and transferring more decision-making power on operational management issues to enterprises, and so on. And these diverse ideas later became the basis for concrete actions in Gorbachev's economic policies. So I just have a few minutes to also finish on this part. So you can see that what is interesting here is that the emphasis is not on the optimality or balancing of consistency of plans, but more and more on the incentives of the economic producers. And finally, the one of the main words of perestroika, the human factor, which means that we need to work to find a solution to for this problem of motivation or incentives for work, which finally leads this reformist thinking to the questions of property relations and finally transition to market. So I think that I will probably stop here to answer the questions, or I can return to these slides further if you have, if you're interested in this last part of perestroika and disintegration of the Soviet Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kirtchik. So in those few minutes, I would like to open the timing for questions. So in the audience, so feel free to send your question. In the meantime, I have a question related with the seminar or with the lecture that we have 2 days ago, and it's about the relationship between socialism technological development or technological improvement. One of the questions in our previous session was about the relationship between all this improvement that we have in artificial intelligence, in programming, in automation. So do you think that eventually all those technological improvements could fit the structural problem of the socialism system in terms of goods allocation? So you mentioned at the beginning of your lecture all these development in or all these theoretical support in mathematics, in general science, cybernetics. Now that we have this prediction that in the next decade, so we will see a massive wave of technological improvement in areas like artificial intelligence. Do you think that is this time different?
Thank you for this question, which is really interesting, I think, to reflect on. No, I think that at least from what I can see in the Soviet debates and experiences and like thought experiments with which led to in this direction. I think that the lesson that we can have here is really that we see the limitations of this type of techno-solutionism. For me, at least, these various experiences and reflections, yes, make me think that indeed the social relations in economy, this other power structures are finally much more important that though not any. So of course these powerful tools like AI, data analysis today can be used for various goals, but I think that this technical socialism, scientific socialism will remain just a utopian project that because technology is important, but it's finally this is just a technical tool. And the real problem of economic relations, social organization is not really there. But this is, of course, it's a very highly controversial question, which is an issue to reflect.
Thank you very much, Professor Kirtchik. My next question would be about the relationship between socialism in practicality, utopian or theoretical socialism, but socialism in operation, and his relationship with authoritarian regimes. So you describe the case of the Soviet Union. My question would be, authoritarianism, socialism in practicality are two sides of the same coin. So it is possible to implement a socialist system without a authoritarian political regime.
That's a huge, huge question, of course, and I wouldn't be able just to answer it just based on the Soviet experience, but at least in the Soviet, if we reflect on this Soviet case and this last slide that you see, really when this disintegration of the Soviet Union, which went really, really fast, extraordinarily fast, like between 87, 88 and 89 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that my conviction in that it was not the main crisis, the main problem was not economic there. even if it is my focus of my interest and of my study. I guess that it's really, this idea. This is really paradoxical and dramatic, that with the human factor, this reflection on the deficiencies of the Soviet system, and political economists, other intellectuals, and Gorbachev himself, I think, believed that real democratization, was a key to improve the economic situation too. So that reform couldn't. So I think that that's really the difference between the Gorbachev's perestroika and the Chinese reforms, right? That for economists, as intellectuals, and reformist party officials like Gorbachev himself believe that economic liberalization and political democratization were intrinsically linked, were important. So this was their vision of real what socialism should be. They believed that Stalinist system was really a deformation of true principles of socialism, and that this socialism could be constructed. So if we could truly democratize the Soviet system with the glassness to the which means that they abolished the censorship, they introduced like democratic elections, democracy on the working floor, and so on. And they believe that this would be a road to prosperity. And we know that, but I think that of course, we cannot generalize from this experience, but I think it was really traumatic, and that this intention to construct what you're talking about, this democratic socialist system, or socialism with the human face, according to the phrase of Gorbachev of the time, that finally it just led to a very quick disintegration of the Soviet Union, and not to reform and prosperity as they expected.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Kirtchik. My final question would be about this last point about perestroika and considering the Soviet experience. In your opinion, perestroika was a reform of the system, or was an structural change? I mean, a radical transition to a new system. So what would be the best description? So it was a reform, or it was either a reform or a structural change.
Once again, at least for the Soviet case, I can really detect when the shift occurs. So I would say that until 88, 89, actually, we are talking really about the change, the reform about improving the economic governance within socialism. And really the main solution proposed and implemented, like in 87 laws on the state enterprise and so on, it's a vision that we grant economic autonomy as much as possible to economic agents, but at the same time we preserve the centralized governance and the main pillars of the Soviet regimes, like the planned economy, centralized administration, and the party leadership, right? And socialist property, of course. All this is so it is about improving this system, but of course then this led to some paradoxes, like how to make enterprises autonomous, to grant them self-management, self-financing, and at the same time centralizing. So decentralizing and centralizing at the same time. Well, it was not it was a difficult question, not an easy one, but then in 89 even you know, the leading reformist political economist of the Soviet Union at the time, Leonid Abalkin, who was the head of the Soviet Commission for the Economic Reform. So really, it was a case when the economists became like part of a government. And, when he write that history teaches us there is no viable alternative to the market for coordinating or harmonizing the activities and interests of economic actors. So, like, and this is 89. So we have really shift from the initial intention is to improve the existing system, and then there's a shift from to the market, and there's no more socialism, no more mentioned in these various documents on reform.
Thank you very much, indeed, Professor Kirtchik. I think that we have a really good session. I'm sure that the audience learned and enjoyed this seminar. Thank you very much to everybody. See you next week. We will continue with our course. And next week on Tuesday, we will have a lecture by Fernando Arteaga that he will talk about the role of the state, role of government. Thank you very much.